I thought it might be a bit clever to, discuss this topic while I was actually doing some tree fella cutting and stuff. But turns out, no. Stream of consciousness works better in your head, or alternatively, you're just sitting in a room. So I might talk over myself
I was
occasionally.
on the Stephen
But
Nolan show last week,
here goes.
and it's hard to know how well it went because I was living it in the first person sense.
So I was on the Stephen Nolan show, and well, it was filmed last week. It was going out tonight, and I haven't seen it yet. So this is it's hard to do a post-mortem on it because obviously I was living it as opposed to watching it. And luckily, there isn't much scope for editorial messing around in the visual sense, because it took 1 hour to film and it's basically 1 hour long. But there is obviously the opportunity to play around with the microphone levels and so on. Personally, I don't think that the BBC are too duplicitous. They're a bit like Corbyn. You kind of know their politics. They're more interested in entertaining or arousing than they are in actually maybe getting to a point or getting to truth or something like this. And the BBC have this sort of feeling. I think they have this idea of the confrontation as a method of truth. It's kind of it's a bit of a fallacy, I believe, but it's how courts justify themselves, that if you have two people arguing with each other, arguing opposite opinions, and the truth will win out. We see in courts that's not always the case, because you can just buy someone who's a better arguer, and then you can obfuscate information to the point that people just don't know. And if you don't know, then you just don't do. And that's possibly a bit of an expertise that people have developed along that line. And I mean, you would have seen it, say, during the Brexit debate. The BBC would turn to one person and who was, say, a Remainer, and argue a very Brexiteer position and try to catch the person out and sort of generally be what would appear to be nasty. And then they'd turn to someone who was a Brexiteer and it'd be the opposite. And it looks like I hate to use the word schizophrenic, but it appears like that the BBC has some sort of multiple personality disorder or mental health problem. Not to hopefully denigrate people who have mental health problems, because the way they're characterized in media isn't really how they exist in reality often. But the BBC would appear to be sort of crazed or unhinged in their methods of interviewing like that, and it's not the way we like to do things. We prefer a proper moderated discussion where people are working towards a better understanding as opposed to merely arguing, and where people aren't lobbyists, as we might say. I don't know if I'm really a lobbyist for environmentalism, but I'd say that people who are on my left and right, they are lobbyists for industry and status quo. Which I suppose brings me along to what I hope I didn't do, which is I hope I didn't talk too much, and also I hope I didn't misrepresent or go against the principles of Extinction Rebellion. Maybe those are three things: talk too much, go against the principles of Extinction Rebellion, and also misrepresent Extinction Rebellion. The reason I say talk too much is, look, Rachel Woods was there. She's a MLA, member of the Legislative Assembly, and she's worked hard in environmental issues for years in politics, trying to, a Sisyphean task, rolling a boulder up a mountain every day, trying to push through green policies. And I respect people who have done that greatly. I took an easier path of doing the academic stuff that the people on either side of me would have encouraged me to do. As in, oh, you should go and study renewable energy integration. Okay, I did that. I did a PhD, did a postdoc, and you still listen to me. Fair enough. And also I installed solar panels and, pellet burners and a variety of, ground source heat pumps, all these kind of renewable energy things. So I've got some hands-on experience, and even living sort of off-grid with people who sort of live alternative lifestyles. But look, none of that really matters at the end of the day. They are brought on to serve their position, and I am there to serve the position that they want, and they just want to have a little argument on TV as if this is some sort of football game or something. And the BBC's position, hopefully not getting too discursive on this, is often, I think they see themselves as the referee that's equally hated by both sides is a fair referee, and I don't think that's necessarily right. I think a referee can be respected from both sides as well as hated. the reason I sort of bring up that is there is a sort of there's an interesting psychological thing in people that if you see your friend or your family or your team hurt, it seems it seems worse than when you see someone you don't care about hurt as much. And this is most easily seen in football or, well, in sports, whereby what you would see as a good solid tackle when your team does it is seen as an obvious, clear and obvious foul when the other person or the other team does it. And this actually happens sort of in the subconscious level. I read quite a good Scientific American article on this. It's actually on the subconscious levels before it reaches your conscious brain. So a lot of us believe in some sort of objective reality and so on. And
I think I'll stick with my folding saw over my pruning saw. Rigidity helps. So this is a chop and drop method, although reach is also good.
But most scientists know that most of what we see is a misrepresentation. Anyway, so the BBC play into this idea that if you attack both sides equally, you'll be seen as fair, and that's not the way human psychology works. So whereas possibly if you're fair to both sides, you're seen as being frustratingly fair.
Yeah, here's a chop and drop method. Chop off the branches, let them fall, create some space for the understory, and in this case, a willow.
But, we believe in this sort of illusion of an objectiveness, that people see things objectively, and that's functionally not true. And it applies to myself as much as anybody else. But so as far as going against the principles of Extinction Rebellion, probably the first one that we'd worry about most would be the no blame, no shame culture. So no one person's to blame. We live in a toxic system. This applies on multiple levels, but on the most personal level, it's like, look, if you have a meat cheat or you are a meat eater, or you do fly regularly, don't just sit there and blame yourself and flagellate yourself and, apologise to your friends. It's not helpful or necessary. This is a system that we grew up in. I slightly tried to bring this up during the discussion when I said, did you actually choose to be a meat eater? Or is this just a cultural thing that you've received? Humans are hugely culturally dependent and culturally flexible. So on the other side of the spectrum is someone like, Bolsonaro or Donald Trump, and you could possibly, pulling out of the Paris agreement.
But the other thing is don't blame others, because blame's interesting. If you blame someone else, perhaps you try to make them responsible, and we are all responsible. We all have something to do. Anyway, so I hope I didn't personally attack people, but we'll see. As I say, I was in that seat, and I haven't been that nervous in a long time. I was rocking the King engine for those people who are familiar with One Punch Man. I could feel my heart punching the front of my chest. I actually felt a little bit of almost that panic attack sensation where it's like the fight or flight. Can I get out of here? What am I doing here? Why did I say yes? But once it started, it was good to go. It's a bit like leaving your house if you have a touch of agoraphobia. Crossing the threshold's the hardest part. Anyway, so a Scandinavian saying, or Chinese saying. Anyway,
Bolsonaro or Donald Trump, and you could possibly, pulling out of the Paris agreement because, it asks too much, or burning down the rainforest. Look, the reason why they're there is because we put them there, or at least a toxic system put them there. So focusing your ire on these one or two people, or individuals, doesn't address the whole overall system. And if you can embody that kind of slight detachment, then I think it does free the mind from anger and hatred, which can then be directed elsewhere. On a similar note, the people in your street who don't recycle, or worse yet, contaminate their recycling with, rubbish or dirty recycling or whatever, or the people that have, 2 4-wheel drives and live opposite your house, talking personally, getting angry with them is not helpful. For whatever reason, they've ended up in that position, and you could just as easily be in their position, they could just as easily be in yours. When you start to take on a degree of activism, you can do something about this. Rather than squandering your energy with anger and hatred, you can actually just redirect it into action. And whenever you're actually engaged in action, you're focused and in the moment and not being dragged off in 100 different directions or giving your energy to anger and hatred. So,
well, let's get a bit artistic. Why not?
Finally, I mean, I hope I did get across some of the points of Extinction Rebellion. I would have liked to have mentioned, 3 demands: better, tell the truth, act now, or act like it's real, and citizens' assemblies. But there was no scope, I think, in that discussion for these sorts of things. These, the sort of French style of philosophical debate that you might have seen between Foucault and Noam Chomsky, like that's of a bygone era in France as much as it is here. We really need to slow down our minds to really sort of get into these topics and digest them. And admittedly, YouTube is providing some long form content in that vein, whereby you have people having a discussion and developing each other's arguments and preferably looking at an object of discussion from multiple angles, so it's better to understand it. A bit like the difference between having a stereoscopic view, depth perception, and like a single viewpoint. But but what was on display, I think, and I mean, look, book Stephen Nolan, get Stephen Nolan. All right, don't be shocked or angry whenever you kind of are faced with this. Do not act surprised. This is what it's about. Unfortunately, the whole thing is seen as a political football, like kicking around climate change as if it's, just another thing to get worked up about. But look, that's life. So we have Stephen Nolan. He's been a part of my life for 20 years. I was listening to him when I was in secondary school and getting incensed by what he was saying and feeling motivated to call into his, radio show, because I thought what was being said was such bullshit. But look, that's why he was there, and that's why he was popular, because I suppose even in an era before YouTube and controversy and clickbait, that's what he was doing. If he was incensing me, he was incensing, half the population of the country. And, he'd always claim, it's the biggest show in the country,
So placing brash around a tree has a number of benefits. First of all, it can shade out the grass beneath. While it decomposes, it'll use up some of the nitrogen, inhibiting the growth of the grass. But also, it shouldn't really inhibit the growth of the tree because the root system is much more complex and it's not as fast growing. And in time, this will rot, the brash will rot down, providing, of course, it'll provide habitat for invertebrates and the like. And those invertebrates will rot down, providing more nitrogen in the form of, the carapaces and stuff. And that will nutritious the ground, which will then become richer over time. And finally, it'll leave behind carbon, which will make the ground better and more healthy. In the meantime, the likes of these trees should grow up, shade the ground a little bit more, inhibit some of the grass growth, and hopefully create a healthier system. This is a big idea. These are willow, and they can grow from slips. You just push them into the ground, but this is a tawny birch, and it will not grow from slips. Hence, this is all now
the country, biggest show in the country. So just getting people angry and riled up, in Northern Ireland, not that difficult, we would much prefer to get heat and bluster and then actually do nothing about it than actually we just prefer to get angry with things and blame people and expect someone else to do it rather than actually get involved ourselves. That said, we do have a fair history of both violent and non-violent direct action, which was not really discussed in the show, but actually that would have been possibly a really bad place to discuss the history of that, just because of the attacking nature of the show that we were experiencing. But yeah, moving on. So the other people who were on there, now we had Anna, who does bear a passing resemblance to Greta Thunberg, but both very intelligent young women, and I think she did a great job. She probably had the majority of the speaking out of all of the panelists. I know her from the youth strikes and so on, but then so she was on the young person's side, but she wasn't like the other three so much, insofar as the other three were, well, they were university students apart from anything else, so they were adults. But I think the other three gave me the impression that they were from a debating society type of thing, and that debating society is a bit like the BBC thing, which is like this confrontation to a path, confrontation as a path to truth, as opposed to a discussion a discussion on an interesting topic whereby you develop each other's ideas. It is more like attack, and then even then in a debate, you're typically expected to defend either side, and it's your use of your intellect to defend an argument.
So you're not meant to be cutting hedges at this time of year because of nesting, but as you can see, it's not a hedge, but the thing it does provide is brash, and brash is used in nests. So I have seen birds pick through brash piles to find materials to build their nest. This rain is going to come on, I reckon. Could have gone to bed a few hours earlier, well, 2 maybe, and started to stay sooner when it was sunny. But is that not a metaphor for climate change and whatnot?
Not use of your intellect to choose which argument to defend. And I hope I'm not misrepresenting the people there. I mean, they were all nice people.
So where might that have cut out? I was thinking, anyway, the BBC, equally loved and loathed by both sides. Oh, well, no, yeah, equally loathed. So especially whenever you get to the more extremes. But one of the interesting things that happens is that
they weren't particularly well informed on the issue, I don't think, of climate change. But then, as I say, that's not on them necessarily to de facto understand climate science. It's on us. The impetus is on us, both as a culture and as a government and as a media outlets, to make people aware of the science, really, the important things in their life. So, Strictly Come Dancing and Celebrity Love Island and something to do with The Bachelor, these are all fine as a distraction, but they're not really important. And if you are competing with important things to provide, if distractions are competing with important things for your attention and smothering out important things, then possibly that's toxic. But I'm not arguing by any stretch of the imagination that people shouldn't have access to, escapism as such. So on the panel and on the adult side, I would say we had Rachel Woods, MLA. Now, hopefully she didn't say as much because she was happy enough for me to just do the sort of bulldog thing. But I would her views are, I'd say, more legitimate. Is that the right word? Than mine. She's definitely I'd try to listen more than speak when I'm around someone like her. And similarly with Anna, that she would know more about. I think she's put more time into studying the IPCC report 2018 than probably I have. I've only been able to give it a couple of hours. I mean, I've got a background in physics and electrical engineering and renewable energy and all that sort of crack, which probably gives me something better of a background. But as far as having actually studied that document, I would defer to her knowledge. If she said, no, it says this, I'm kind of going to go, yeah, fair enough. I'll agree that it probably says that until proven otherwise. And then finally, there were two other men either side of me. I did not have any preparation for who they were. I kind of recognise them from somewhere. They seemed familiar, but they were flown in from England for this task. And they did mention that that Stephen Nolan beforehand had got them a bit riled up and said, yeah, get stuck in, this kind of, like you might do with someone before a fight or something. Now, meanwhile, myself and Rachel Woods and the other people were in the green room, so we were just chilling out, just, small talk, chatting, relaxed. But seemingly these other two guys who are more celebrity and I assume had their airfares paid to fly in that day, were in chatting with the likes of Stephen Nolan, because they're bigger honchos than me. Apparently one's a politician. I'm really looking forward to finding out who they are or who they were. And I guess they probably expected me to be someone who could kick around as well, because I'm just some schmo from like a small Extinction Rebellion kind of local group who just, struggle to put stuff on, and everyone's overworked and tired. But I mean, that's activism gets its name from like the thing that you're doing mostly, which is being active, and herding leftists herding leftists, organizing leftists is a bit like herding squirrels, as many of us say. Um, Not that we should all be leftists by any stretch of the imagination. We need to reach out to capitalists. I mean, Mark Carney and the governor of the Bank of England, the former governor of the Bank of England now.
On this topic of this tree, this is an alder. Alder are a brittle tree, hence it can cut through a branch quite quickly, but it means that limbs which grow out like this will be less valuable in the long term because they will just snap off. So I went into I had no prep for the whole Stephen Nolan thing. So when I went into it, I had been given more or less the questions beforehand. I didn't have much time to revise them because you know what, this isn't my job. The two other guys from England, I think that is their job. But
Mark Carney and the governor of the Bank of England, the former governor of the Bank of England now, he's saying about, like, he's on our side, if that's not the wrong way to say it, but he's saying about, divest from fossil fuel industry to save your own money, because it's only a matter of time. Because in the next 10 years, either fossil fuel industry will be worth nothing, or alternatively, 20 or 30 years later, we're facing societal collapse. So, your call, like, either way, heads you lose, tails, everybody loses. So, yeah, anyway, moving on. We want more capitalists. We want more people from across the board to be interested in climate change, because, like, the science is clear. Which brings me slightly on to one overall meta point, which is that I think the people who were there felt like they were arguing with me and possibly with the other Greens on the table, that as if it was like a debate, and they were arguing about ideas, but they're not arguing with us. They're arguing with the IPCC report and the UN report and all that sort of stuff. And it was something that Kumi Naito said. I don't know. He's a former director general, whatever, of Amnesty International. But he said two things. It's like the science doesn't change and the climate doesn't negotiate. I thought, yeah, very good one-liners right there. So yeah, you're not negotiating with us. This is not like the USA and the USSR sort of having a negotiation about nuclear disarmament or something, right? You're not negotiating with me, you're negotiating with the planet. Like, I don't decide to melt the North Pole or not melt the North Pole. That's just a thing that happens. We're just here to go, like, if you keep doing what you're doing, this is what, to the best of our knowledge, is going to happen. But sometimes I think, if you're in that sort of debating argument, you think that you're debating with a person, as opposed to, or you're arguing with a person as opposed to, trying to argue with the tide. So, apparently the King Canute story, Canute was trying to make it clear to his people that he was not powerful enough to turn the tide back. Not that he was so arrogant that he could turn the tide back, which I think is very redeeming in my perspective. So one of the things I noticed about the discussion is, right, very often the moderator would be trying to keep the person or the people or the discussion on topic or to the questions. I found that did not happen, and it took me a little while to actually adjust to that. That's to say that in the first question, I had something semi-prepared in my mind about what I should have said. The question was, are children obsessed with climate change? My argument would have gone something along the lines of, they're not obsessed with climate change, they're obsessed with social media and TikTok, and hence like which is seems to be an inflammatory cause of increased depression and anxiety amongst the youth. If half as many people were obsessed with climate change as are obsessed with TikTok, then we would have 7,000 people on the streets of Belfast, once a month at the climate strikes, not once a year. So yeah, that I had something like that in my mind, and further to that, one of the things that Greta Thunberg said early on, which really made me take interest in her. I mean, I've never really followed her, but like, you know what I mean? I'm not really her target audience. But she said early on, it's like, I saw these people playing their games of power and I just wasn't interested. And I was like, wow, I would have been like that when I was, young, just like a boy who was not very interested in football, and like, but I was quite interested in status within the class, but I didn't want to be at the top, just didn't want to be at the bottom, and that was not pleasant. But you see often with kids on the spectrum, they're just not interested in that. So she got interested in climate change and then went, oh my god, this is completely insane, what are you doing? And then turns to adults and goes, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, that's not a thing. And she's like, no, it really is a thing. So yeah, that was it. But I think by the time it got around to me, it was something about, are we scaring our youth? It's like, why are you scaring our youth? And then ended up, then you're kind of trying to be defensive, and it's very difficult to be defensive without being aggressive. So in that situation, it probably would have been better for me to move it back onto the question. And I think I did that in some later questions, but I was learning on my feet with that one. But from the perspective of scaring children with the science, I have often found that if I'm the only person worried about something, I'm much more worried. So yeah, let's find somewhere else for these. When someone else takes notice and goes, oh no, this is also a problem, then I start to relax, because I know now that we have multiple eyes on the problem, we have multiple minds who can solve the problem. So that if adults took more of an interest in climate change, actually you'd probably find that the school children would be less worried under the circumstances. So yeah, I think that would have cleared it up. So the next question that was asked was, should kids be allowed to strike? And to be honest, I think that was answered very well. Everyone was more or less on board. It's like, what do you mean by allowed to strike? So one of the guys questioned the whole thing about extinction, said like no scientists are predicting human extinction. And to some extent they aren't, but to other extent they are. They say he's half right. But, I mean, it has got to do with mass extinctions. I didn't get to draw them out on the subject whether or not they believed we were living in, the sixth mass extinction of the planet Earth. I mean, depending on when you want to look at it, it could have started 2 million years ago, 100,000 years ago, or 200 years ago. But at the end of the day, this is where we're at. A bit rainy. It's not like your bosses allow you to strike, you strike. And that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect is, I guess, in this very specific case, I mean, obviously my opinion would be, like, the idea of locking the gates, the degree to which that the school will facilitate the children to strike is a different question. And I mean, I think that they should be allowed to go out if their conscience dictates. And I think it was fairly pejorative, the way that your man to my left, the older politician, discussed, them just playing hooky or scheming just off school. And I mean, it's a bit like saying that, having like striking is just a matter of, people just like bunking off work and heading down the pub. It's like, if anybody has organised these things, you know how difficult it is coming back again to herding squirrels. But I think that was addressed as well within the show. It was good whenever he tried to turn it back on me, as far as me being condescending to the guy opposite, regards him not knowing about Extinction Rebellion. But like, as I said, why should he know about us? We're a small organisation who are consistently misrepresented. I mean, I would have liked to make more of a point of that when you see someone being arrested or whatever, that's the tip of the iceberg. Um, and behind every one person that gets arrested, there's 10 people who are supporting them. And if you look at the people who are getting arrested, they're not like, crazy anarchists who just want to burn stuff down. They're typically concerned people. And even the stuff about, oh, look, they're so white and middle class. It's like, yeah, they are. Whenever the Daily Telegraph or something like that is saying, look how white and middle class these people are, it's like, it's very rare you'd hear someone like the right-wing media slagging things off for being too white and middle class. That is their target demographic at the end of the day. But yeah, these people have been motivated to do something about this. But yeah, so there's a fair amount of misrepresentation, I think. But also, I mean, even the people gluing themselves to trains, that came up a few times. Like, I can't in all good conscience say that what they did was wrong, because that's what the media choose to bring up time and time again. And yeah, which I suppose brings on to the next question: is XR too radical? And like that, I mean, that was a group of 20 or 30 people who planned those actions that now are being talked about time and again. The 20,000 people who were in London engaged in non-violent direct action, have been chucked around by police. They were ignored by the media. Now, it can seem like we're kind of been a little bit, what is the good and bad word for it, but just, the fact that we're just trying to be loud and obnoxious and kind of, me, centre of attention. It's sort of unfortunately true for what we need to do. ContraPoints mentioned it well. It's like we live in a time of image, not of substance, which is unfortunate, because if we live in a time of substance, in theory, there's enough sensation and craze and disgust. An interesting note on wetlands. The degree of roots in amongst this is really heavy. This is heavier than, well, a sack of whatever you want to call it. I reckon that would sink. It's amazing. And that's all carbon from the air sequestered into a big ball, and when it stays underwater, it has difficulty rotting, and especially whenever it gets anaerobic or there's no oxygen there. And that's how we sequester carbon. That is why wetlands are so important to nature and for getting carbon out of the atmosphere, but often seen as of very low economic value, which is why we don't really care too much about destroying them. A little bit like the Amazon rainforest. Virtually no economic value in doing anything else other than destroying it. In saying that, not an insignificant amount of destruction wrought upon this pond, but it has restored it to do a different function. And it doesn't take long for nature to reclaim when given the right circumstances. In what is happening with the climate crisis, I mean, we have governments all around the world who are just not respecting the Paris Agreement at all. Just like international treaty between nearly all the countries in the world, and most of them just going, yeah, whatever, we're just not going to do that. If there were most of the countries around the world just not respecting human rights, they would be up in arms about it, but they're not. So that's one aspect. And what's hit me recently is the failure of engineers and scientists for not, taking the time to read the IPCC report. Now, it is a toxic system, and I don't know many of people, lecturers and so on in my university, who really have the time to do anything other than what they're mandated to do. And by that I mean the university mandates them to do 60 or 80 hours of work a week. Well, they mandate them to do 80 hours of work a week. They manage to do 60 hours of work a week, and they can still be fired for not doing those 20 hours of work a week. And when you create that stress in people's minds, they do not have time to go out and go, hold on a second, what about this whole climate change thing? Maybe I should spend half an hour glancing over the IPCC report and going, oh my God, what you mean, like in 100 years there's a very good chance of, the entire collapse of our ecosystems. In the next 30 to 50 years, just societal collapse as, we're beset by a multitude of, problems, ranging from large-scale crop failures driven by water shortages, both due to the changing in rainfall patterns, but also in like the depletion of aquifers and major breadbaskets, but also just from mass immigration caused by wide-scale famine. These are, and I think I managed to communicate that well enough. At one point, that's where I'd sort of, I hope I didn't feel like I was attacking the individual too much, as opposed to exposing him to some science. Like, would it be too cruel for me to go to a flat earther and just lay on a load of arguments about why the globe is round? Would that be seen as being too aggressive? Like, hopefully not. Hopefully I was just getting the opinions across and not attacking the person. Fingers crossed. So, are Extinction Rebellion too radical? One other aspect of that is, and this, I mean, I couldn't have discussed this in that format at all, because, well, one, you could find a lot better people to discuss these points, and two, there is no scope or time for it, and it would be a jarring change of pace and so on to actually discuss these things in good faith. So, but one of the reasons why Extinction Rebellion needs to be radical is because the longer we hold up this peaceful transformation, the more likely it is that we're going to end up with violence. Because, like, we're already starting off with a tinderbox. People are already angry, right? It's not really that surprising. 11, 12 years of stagnation following a recession, when people's, what people can expect, their ways of life have plateaued. And this is for people who are, if you were a nurse, a teacher, whatever, in 2008, 12 years later, you're more or less in the same position, but you're 12 years older. And the people who were 20 then, our way of life is, well, our wealth, shall we say, has somewhat plateaued. So yeah, if you were a teacher or a nurse or working in a factory or something like this 12 years ago, you haven't really seen much in the way of an upswing in your earnings. And you can argue, but it's sort of much in the muchness, but you're 12 years older now. So people who were, say, 20 in 2008, they haven't seen much of an upswing in their quality of life or in their wealth. And this is a problem, and this is a breeding ground for anger. And when people are angry, they just want, they naturally want to lash out. And, we can see this in the rise of some of the far right. I mean, arguably the likes of, Brexit and Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, they're not the natural people to help, the common man or the common person. They aren't from that group of people, but yet they've managed to harness this anger to their own ends. And it's completely understandable. But people, as the climate crisis unfolds, people will become, well, they will change their anger and divert it towards that. And there's a very good possibility that the non-violent direct action practiced by Extinction Rebellion, will be superseded by groups who advocate violent action. Now, Extinction Rebellion are doing very well to repopularize the ideas of non-violent direct action. Look, these ideas are old, but I did not hear about them until I came across Extinction Rebellion, which is slightly strange because my parents were very involved in the civil rights movement in Northern Ireland in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s. And, they did things like illegal marches and some theatrics and so on. But Northern Ireland provides a very good example with that whenever you have a state which is so hostile to non-violent direct action, and addressing the problems that have given rise to non-violent direct action, then it morphs into violent direct action, and that has caused so many scars in our society. It's really difficult for us to discuss here because in most places they talk about violent direct action in the abstract, whereas in Northern Ireland it's still very, very close to home. And strangely, with the civil rights movement in Northern Ireland is not often brought up as an example or discussed, but it's kind of almost like a cultural thing that we have. It's just, we don't talk about the Troubles because if you mention the civil rights to a significant group of people in Northern Ireland, they're going to just think it was a cover for the IRA. It was a cover for violent action. And in fairness, like the likes of Bloody Sunday, at the front of the march for civil rights, non-violent march, I mean, it was illegal because, the security forces and everybody else was completely against the idea of civil rights. But at the back there was, a riot or a riot going on or a scuffle. And that turned bloody on Bloody Sunday. So, there's some arguments there. It's a really difficult discussion to have over here. But this is the problem. Like, if we're talking about this in 10 years and we haven't taken significant action, then people are going to start burning stuff down. Like, and this is not going to, we believe anyway, Extinction Rebellion would very much say it's not going to help. If you start engaging in violent action, you reduce your chances of success, apart from anything else, apart from all the damage you do. It's like, you might consider such and such a person to be a legitimate target, but, and you might kill that person, or you might injure that person, or you might burn their house down or something like this. But look, that person knows hundreds, 100 people, and you're only making enemies, and you're only traumatizing people, and you're really setting things back, which is not where we want to be. We just want the climate crisis to be addressed in the way that it said it would be addressed in the Paris Agreement and what has been laid out as things to do in the which has been laid out in the IPCC report. It told us what we had to do about CO2 emissions. It's quite clear. Get to net zero globally by 2040. Very latest we could do is by 2055. And I had two people either side of me saying like, yeah, but that's just not possible. We just can't do it. And they are half right. And that's terrifying. I mean, we've been saying this stuff since the 90s, right? Here's another fallacy, that this is something new, right? When I was in primary school, I had a teacher say to me, climate change is your problem, it's not our problem, because it's not going to be a problem for about 30 years, right? I was like 6. We knew about it then. We know about it now, right? 1996, we had the Kyoto Agreement. That didn't come out of nowhere. That came out of like a decade of science and research and so on that led up to that. This has been around for a long time. It's just become so serious because it's been ignored for so long, because it's just so convenient to ignore it and so inconvenient to deal with it. And unfortunately, that has necessitated, the types of actions which Extinction Rebellion are engaging in, because the longer we leave this, the more likely it is it's just going to become worse and worse and worse. And this. Is it legitimate to go and burn down the headquarters of BP? Right? Is it? I mean, these are, or ExxonMobil or someone like this. Like, there's a strong argument for yes, they're already responsible for, like, say, the loss of the Maldives. So the destruction of an entire country. Right? That's it. They're, in no small part, responsible for that. Can the Maldives sort of send in an army to burn down, or destroy BP in some way? It doesn't really bear thinking about. Would be better if we did something about this appropriately. But anyway, sorry. It's sad. But yeah, our Extinction Rebellion too radical. Interestingly, in the UN emissions gap report, they made the point that they said that, like, I think dire, the situation is dire. They said no meaningful action's been taken. So it was 2019, so 4 years after the Paris Agreement, no meaningful action's been taken. There seems no likelihood that emissions are going to peak in the next few years and start to drop off drastically as laid out, as necessitated by by the IPCC report. And well, every year we don't do anything about this. That figure of 2040 doesn't stay, it comes closer to us. Because we've done nothing for 2 years, it now means that rather than it being 2040, it'll be 2039 or 2038. Right? It's going the wrong way. It becomes less and less possible the longer we leave this. And, if we started in 1990, whenever I first started hearing about the problem with climate change. We knew we had to reduce our CO2 emissions in 1990. If we'd started then, this would be a lot easier. But we chose not to. And we chose to make this ridiculous mountain to climb. But, we're humans. We like climbing mountains. I don't know. We only seem to solve problems once we've really, really created them. But anyway, sorry, the UN emissions gap report. It said 2 glimmers of hope. It's like, one, the elevation of the climate crisis and the public consciousness through people like, the youth strikers and Extinction Rebellion and so on, which has increased, climate concerns from 5th, in the list of people's concerns to sometimes first-ish, but then second or third a lot of the other times. Immigration remains high up there, and like national debt and so on. Like, all these things are, they're things, they're problems, but they're problems that will still exist if we don't wipe out humanity. And I think, they are, and that is really what we're doing at this point. It's not just humanity either, I think there's an implication that, by one of the speakers, that extinctions weren't happening. He did say that people don't drown in Bangladesh. Now, he probably misspoke. That's probably not what he meant. But look, these, people die every year. We're just saying more people are going to die every year because of our actions. You can't say one person or another was directly killed by climate change, like, say, Hurricane Katrina. Not even just, say, Hurricane Katrina is an interesting example, because it wasn't just climate change, it was also the fact that the land use changes and what was done to the Everglades and so on. So, that sums up, like, principle 2. We need to stop both ecocide, but also CO2 emissions. So it's like the destruction of land through land use changes and pollution is as much of a problem as climate change. Right now, it's like, was it something like 13% of degradation of land is driven by climate change, and 50% is driven by land use changes. So cutting, destruction of mangrove forests, draining of swamps, just building everywhere, burning down rainforests. These are just humans being humans. Even without CO2 being a problem, it's still we'd still have a big hill to climb as far as changing our habits. And it's just sort of sad that so much is being sacrificed to this idea of growth. And not even just like growth in the long term, just growth in the short term. You're only talking like, 5 to 7 year time window. If you start thinking about 50 to 70 years, none of this makes any sense. It's not only illogical, it's insane. So, are Extinction Rebellion too radical? I don't know. I don't think so. I think what has happened has necessitated this. And I suppose you could always turn it back as well. Are BP and ExxonMobil and so on too radical in their denial of science and their obfuscation of science? Are they psychopathic in how they decided to act 30 or 40 years ago? And the people they choose, and the people they choose to pay to come and argue these points. And interestingly, I was told beforehand that it would not be a debate about, the truth of climate change. And, but fair enough. Like, the person I spoke to, he seems very, very down to earth. He seems like a really nice guy. But to be honest, there's no difference between the people that I was speaking with and climate change deniers under the circumstances, because both argue for the same course of action, which is do nothing. Which is, Now, I accept that a lot of deniers come from a worse place. I think that a lot of deniers are basically they just don't like liberals or the liberal agenda or the left, and it's just become a left-right thing. And it's not so much that they don't believe in the science, it's more that they just don't believe us. They just don't like us. So what we like, they dislike. I think a lot that's a space where a lot of people come from. Hello. So perhaps I can wrap up a last question quite quickly. Personal change, right? You can look at electrical systems. Residential consumption is between 20 and 30%. And that seems about right to me. We are about 20 or 30%, of the problem, but we're 100% of the solution. And this is really clever what they've done. They've decided to go, they've decided to turn it on to us. They've decided to, by saying to the consumer, we need to change, then they orchestrate a fight between two factions, so the left and the right. Because if someone turns up and tells me to do something, my initial thing is, fuck off. You don't get to tell me what to do. Yeah, so I think that's what they've managed to do. And they've done this time and time again. So Northern Ireland's a good example of this, whereby civil rights shouldn't have been contentious. Free access to, an open access, not based on your religion or community, to government and resources shouldn't have been a problem. And it's not just in the 1970s, back in 1910 as well, as some of the unionisation occurred. There was also that problem. There was, Catholics and Protestants were united on an issue, but the powers that be managed to fracture us down the middle, so we end up wasting our energy fighting with each other rather than uniting in a common cause. And they'll do this time and time again. And the best way to do this is to say personal change is the answer. But yeah, even if we all, if everybody put solar panels on their house so that you offset all of your electrical usage, well done. You've reduced the electrical demand by 20 or 30%. 100% reduction for us is equivalent to a 30% reduction for them. And they will not invest in this stuff because they're financiers. They want a return within 2 years or 1.5 years on any investment. That is disgusting. And that has been business reality for 30 or 40 years. And I think that people do not accept this reality because it doesn't make any sense. Why would someone not invest in that? You or I would invest in something which would give us a payback within 2 years, which within 4 years, not only would you have paid for the thing, but you'd have got the money back. And 6 years later, you've doubled it. Why would we not do this? This is insane. And businesses are supposed to be cold and rational, but that's business culture now. And that's why we need system change, not climate change. Well, climate change is upon us. Finally, we're not necessarily guaranteed any level of success as far as averting the worst of this. But what we can do is delay it. I suppose I didn't bring up COVID-19 so much, but it could have been a good example. We have no guarantee. We are all going to get sick, but all we can do is push it back further. Well, we might not all get sick. Maybe 60% of us will get sick. Maybe 80% of us will get sick. We'll find out. But ultimately, it is gonna touch all of us. But we can push back the peak, and that's what we can do with climate change. And hopefully, this global pandemic, this global catastrophe, will demonstrate what we as humans can do and what can change in the face of a catastrophe. We can learn from these things, and hopefully we'll take the best from it. Now, we may lose 1% of the human population because of COVID-19, and that'll be tragic. But the other 99% are being sacrificed to climate change because business as usual doesn't want to change its ways. And I'd like people to bear that in mind.